I'm Scarlett Vance, 28, female, and according to the man who raised me, I am a failure who is utterly unfit for service. That wasn't his private opinion, whispered in the confines of our home. It was his public proclamation, a verdict delivered with the full force of his rank and reputation in front of the very world he accused me of being unworthy of. My father, Colonel Marcus Vance, is a man who measures life in neatly pressed uniforms, polished brass, and the unwavering ascent of a military career. In his eyes, I had not only chosen to walk a different path, I had stumbled off a cliff. To understand the weight of that day, the day the entire foundation of his world cracked under the weight of three small words, you have to understand the years that built the pressure. My life has been a long, quiet study in the art of being a disappointment. It started early. I was a child of books and shadows, content with the imaginary worlds I found in dusty library corners. My younger brother, Liam, was a child of the sun and the parade ground. He was a miniature version of our father before he could even properly tie his own shoes. I remember one specific Saturday afternoon when I was 12. I had just won first place in a statewide essay competition. The topic was the ethics of future technology, and I had poured weeks of research and thought into it. I came home clutching a small, elegant trophy and a certificate, my heart thrumming with a pride that felt pure and bright. I found my father in the backyard, coaching a 10-year-old Liam on how to properly salute. "Dad, look," I said, holding out the trophy. He glanced at it, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes before it settled into his usual mask of faint dismissal. "An essay contest? That's nice, Scarlett, very academic." He turned back to Liam. "No, son, snap to it. Your fingers must be rigid, your thumb aligned with the seam of your trousers. It's about discipline, precision." He spent the next hour drilling Liam on the finer points of military bearing, his voice booming with encouragement. "That's it, a future general right here." My small golden trophy seemed to grow heavier and duller in my hands until I quietly took it inside and placed it on my dresser where it gathered dust. Liam, for his part, received a new official-looking compass from Dad that evening as a reward for his excellent progress. It wasn't malice on my father's part, not exactly. It was a complete and total blindness to any form of success that didn't reflect his own. My world of words and ideas was, to him, a frivolous hobby. Liam's world of salutes and drills was the bedrock of character. The schism between us deepened into a chasm the day I left the Air Force Academy. I had gone, of course. For him, I'd spent 2 grueling years trying to contort myself into the shape he desired. I learned how to march, how to shoot, how to lead a squadron in simulated exercises. I was even good at it, which was the most frustrating part. But my soul felt like it was suffocating under the starched collar of my uniform. It wasn't my fight, not my calling. I wanted to serve, but not in the rigid, predictable lines of a parade formation. I saw a different kind of battlefield, one fought with information, with intuition, with the quiet courage of operating in the gray spaces where rules were rewritten daily. The day I told him I was leaving was the day he first looked at me with genuine contempt. We were in his study, a room that smelled of leather and polish, dominated by a large mahogany desk. His own medals were framed on the wall, a silent council of judges. "You're what?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. "I'm withdrawing, Dad. It's not for me," I said, my own voice steadier than I felt. "I'm going to finish my degree at a civilian university, political science and cryptography." He stared at me, his face slowly turning a deep, mottled red. "You are throwing away the Vance legacy. You are throwing away everything I have worked to give you. Do you know the shame this brings? My own daughter a quitter." "It's not quitting," I argued, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "It's choosing a different way." "There is no different way," he thundered, slamming his hand on the desk, making the pens in their holder jump. "There is the path of honor and there is the path of failure. You have made your choice." From that day on, I was no longer just a disappointment, I was a source of active shame. He rarely spoke of me to his colleagues. When he did, it was with a sigh and a shake of his head as if lamenting a tragic, inexplicable loss. Meanwhile, Liam's star ascended. He graduated from the academy with honors, a carbon copy of our father's younger self. The photographs of his commissioning ceremony took center stage on the mantelpiece, pushing the older family photos, the ones where I was still smiling to the dusty edges. Which brought me to the phone call 3 weeks before the ceremony. Scarlett, he said, his voice clipped and formal, the way it always was when he was about to issue an order he expected me to follow. The annual base awards ceremony is on the 21st. Liam is receiving a commendation for his unit's performance. You will be there. It wasn't a question, it was a summons. Dad, I don't know if I can get the time off, I said, a weak but standard excuse. My job, as he understood it, was a vague consulting position for a tech firm in DC. He imagined me in a cubicle typing away at meaningless reports. The reality was something I could never explain to him. You will make the time, he stated flatly. Your brother deserves the full support of his family. It's important for appearances. General Hayes himself will be presenting the award. I will not have my family look fractured or unsupportive. Appearances, that was always the core of it. Not family, not support, but the pristine, unblemished image of the Vance family. I was a crack in the veneer, and my presence was required so he could plaster over it with a show of familial unity. I'll see what I can do, I murmured, the familiar weight of resignation settling over me. Don't just see what you can do, Scarlett, be there 1400 hours, sharp, try to wear something respectable. The line went dead before I could reply. I hung up the phone and stared out my apartment window, watching the distant, silent dance of traffic. He wanted me there as a prop, a dark, cautionary backdrop to highlight the brilliance of his chosen son. He had no idea what he was asking. He had no idea that for once I was going to give him exactly what he wanted, a direct, undeniable comparison between his two children. He just wasn't going to like the result. The 2 weeks leading up to the ceremony were a masterclass in quiet dread. Every time my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, my stomach would lurch, expecting it to be my father with another reminder or a passive-aggressive question about my travel plans. He didn't disappoint. A week before the event, a text came through. Booked you a room at the base visitors' quarters. No excuses. Your brother is very excited to see you. I knew Liam probably hadn't mentioned me once. He wasn't cruel like my father, just absorbed. He lived in the bright sunshine of our father's approval and had long since learned not to squint into the shadows where I resided. For him, it was easier that way. His excitement was a tool my father used, another small turn of the screw to ensure my compliance. My own work was demanding. My vague consulting job involved coordinating intelligence assets for an upcoming operation in Eastern Europe. It was a delicate dance of encrypted messages, satellite imagery analysis, and human intelligence reports. My days were spent in a sterile, windowless room known as the hub, where the only light came from a wall of monitors displaying data streams from halfway across the world. My colleagues were quiet, intense people who, like me, had a cover story for their families. We were accountants, IT specialists, and logistics managers. In reality, we were the unseen gears of national security. My official title, Covert Operations Specialist, was a mouthful that meant I was responsible for the lives of agents in the field. There was no room for error, no space for personal drama. Yet the thought of the ceremony on the base was a persistent, low-grade hum of anxiety in the back of my mind. Part of me, a foolish, younger part, still held a flicker of hope. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe seeing me as an adult, living my own life, would have softened him. Maybe he would introduce me with a simple, "This is my daughter, Scarlett," and leave it at that. It was a ridiculous fantasy, a ghost of a wish from a child who had long since stopped believing in fairy tales. The logical part of me, the part that my job had honed to a razor's edge, knew exactly what was coming. It was a strategic maneuver on his part, and I was walking into a pre-planned ambush. My handler, a dry-witted man named Elias who looked more like a history professor than a spy master, noticed my distraction. "Everything all right, Vance?" he asked one afternoon, sliding a cup of coffee onto my desk without looking up from a tablet. "Just some family stuff," I said, my eyes still on a satellite feed of a border crossing. Elias made a non-committal noise. "The worst kind, anything that compromises your security." That was the only question that mattered in our world. No, just annoying. Well, try to compartmentalize the annoyance, he said. We need your head in the game. The assets in Sector Gamma are relying on your analysis, not your family drama. He was right. I pushed the thoughts of my father away and focused on the task at hand. Compartmentalization was the first skill they taught us. You build walls in your mind. Your work is in one room, your cover life in another, your real self, whatever is left of it, is in a third. The trick is to never let the doors between them open. But my father had a key to one of those doors, and he was about to stride right through it. The day before the ceremony, I stood in front of my closet facing a tactical decision far different from my usual ones, what to wear to my own execution. My father had said something respectable, that was code. It meant something that wouldn't embarrass him, something conservative, modest, and utterly forgettable. I perused the options. Most of my clothes were practical, comfortable, and dark, designed for long hours of sitting or for blending into a crowd, nothing flashy. I finally settled on a simple, high-necked, long-sleeved blouse in a soft gray color and a pair of well-tailored black trousers. It was the uniform of invisibility, it was respectable, it was forgettable, it covered everything, including the intricate ink-black sigil tattooed on my upper back just below my neck, the one piece of my true life that was physically a part of me. It was a stylized raven, its wings spread, clutching a key in its talons. It was the emblem of my unit, a unit so classified it didn't officially exist. It was a mark of honor earned through a trial that had nearly broken me. It was a symbol of a loyalty and a service my father could never comprehend, and it needed to remain hidden. As I packed my small overnight bag, I felt a familiar coldness settle in my stomach. It was the same feeling I used to get at the academy before a major inspection, the certainty that no matter how perfect my preparations, some flaw would be found. I was walking into the lion's den, and my only armor was a practiced calm and a gray silk blouse. The drive to Edwards Air Force Base was a journey back in time. The flat, sun-baked landscape of the Mojave Desert unspooled outside my window. I'd grown up on bases like this one, sterile, orderly communities carved out of the wilderness. The perfectly manicured lawns, the identical houses, the constant roar of jet engines in the sky, it was the soundtrack of my childhood. But it no longer felt like home. It felt like a foreign country. I pulled up to the main gate, and the young airman in the security booth leaned out. "Ma'am, your ID and reason for visit," he asked, his voice crisp and professional. I handed him my driver's license. "Scarlett Vance, I'm here for the award ceremony. My father is Colonel Marcus Vance." He typed the name into his computer. His posture straightened immediately. "Of course, ma'am, Colonel Vance, he's expecting you, go on through. The visitors' quarters are to your left, and the officers' club where the ceremony is straight ahead. Can't miss it." His deference wasn't for me, it was for my father's name. Here on this base, Marcus Vance was royalty. I was just an extension of him, a minor footnote to his legacy. I gave the airman a small smile and drove through, the feeling of being an imposter growing with every foot I traveled deeper into his territory. I checked into my room at the visitors' quarters. It was Spartan, clean, and impersonal, just as I remembered. I laid my outfit on the perfectly made bed and stared at it. For a moment, I considered turning around, getting back in my car, and driving away. I could text him an excuse, car trouble, a sudden work emergency. He would be furious, but the fury would be distant. It was a tempting thought. But then another thought, colder and harder, pushed it aside. I had spent my entire life avoiding his judgment, shrinking away from his disapproval. Running away now would just be another tick in his column of my failures. For once, I would not run. I would stand there, I would absorb the impact, and I would survive. That was a skill my new life had taught me well. Survival. I took a deep breath, picturing the mental walls Elias always talked about. One by one, I fortified them. The dread was still there, but it was now contained, locked in a room I wouldn't open until it was all over. I was no longer just Scarlett Vance, the disappointing daughter. I was Specialist Vance, and I was ready for the mission. The officers' club was exactly as I remembered them all being, a universe of dark wood, polished leather, and the faint, lingering smell of old coffee and floor wax. The walls were lined with squadron photos and paintings of fighter jets soaring through idealized clouds. It was a shrine to a very specific kind of glory, my father's kind. A low murmur of conversation filled the large banquet hall, punctuated by the clinking of glasses. Men and women in crisp dress uniforms mingled with their families, who looked on with a mixture of pride and polite boredom. I spotted them almost immediately, standing near the head table at the front of the room. My father, Colonel Marcus Vance, was in his element. He stood ramrod straight in his dress blues, a constellation of ribbons on his chest, laughing why. A group of other senior officers. He commanded the space around him, drawing people in with his confident posture and booming voice. And beside him, looking like a newly minted coin, was my brother. Lieutenant Liam Vance was the golden boy personified. His uniform was immaculate, his shoes polished to a mirror shine, his face beaming with the uncomplicated pride of a man who has always met expectations. He was a good person, my brother, but he was a product of his environment, a perfectly cultivated plant in our father's greenhouse. I took a fortifying breath and began the long walk across the room. It felt like crossing 100 yards of enemy territory. With each step, I felt the persona of Specialist Vance solidify around me, a necessary armor. My face was neutral, my posture relaxed but alert. My father saw me first. His smile tightened for a fraction of a second before he recomposed it into something resembling a welcome. "Ah, Scarlett, you made it. Excellent." He turned to the two other colonels and a major he was speaking with. "Gentlemen, may I present my daughter Scarlett?" The introduction hung in the air, conspicuously lacking any follow-up, any detail about what I did or who I was. It was an introduction that was also a dismissal. The colonels gave me polite, disinterested nods. The major, a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, offered a small smile. "A pleasure to meet you. And of course, you all know my son, Lieutenant Vance," my father continued, clapping Liam on the shoulder with a pride that was almost theatrical. "Just back from a tour in the Gulf, the boy's a natural, a real leader." Liam blushed slightly but soaked in the praise. "Dad, stop." He turned to me. "Scarlett, hey, it's good to see you." "You too, Liam. Congratulations on the commendation," I said, and I meant it. His success wasn't his fault, and he'd earned it. "Thanks," he said, shifting his weight. He always seemed slightly uncomfortable when the three of us were together, as if he could sense the high-voltage current of tension between my father and me. My father wasn't done. This was the opening salvo of the ambush I had predicted. He gestured vaguely toward me. "Scarlett took a different route, went to the academy for a bit, but decided the discipline wasn't for her. She's in the tech world now, in DC, one of those consulting things." He said the word consulting as if it were something you de-scrape off the bottom of your shoe. The major's smile became a little more fixed. One of the colonels grunted. "Ah, civilian life, well, it takes all kinds." The subtext was clear. It takes all kinds, but our kind is better. I just smiled serenely, a trick I'd learned from interrogators. A calm, pleasant expression could be more unnerving than any argument. "It's interesting work," I said, offering no further details. My refusal to be baited, to show any sign of hurt or defensiveness, seemed to annoy my father more than anything. He changed tactics. "Well, come on, let me introduce you to General Hayes. He's been wanting to meet the whole family." My internal alarms blared. This was it, the main event. He was taking me to the apex of his world, the center of power on this base, to perform this little play for the most important audience possible. General Thuron Hayes stood by the podium, speaking with his aide. He was a tall man, leaner than my father, with a quiet intensity that seemed to command more respect than my father's booming presence. He had pale, watchful eyes and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. When he saw us approaching, he ended his conversation and turned to us with a polite smile. "Marcus," he said, his voice a low baritone, "good to see you, and this must be the family." "General Hayes, you know my son Liam," my father said, practically shoving Liam forward. "Of course, Lieutenant." General Hayes shook Liam's hand firmly. "I read the report from your commanding officer. Exceptional work, you have a bright future." Thank you, sir," Liam stammered, his face glowing. Then my father turned to me. The moment was perfectly staged. He put a hand on my shoulder, his grip just a little too tight, a gesture that was meant to look paternal but felt like an assertion of ownership. "And this general," he said, his voice dropping into a tone of theatrical sorrow, "is my daughter, Scarlett." General Hayes turned his pale, watchful eyes on me. I met his gaze directly, my own expression unreadable. "And it's a pleasure to meet you, sir," I said calmly. "The pleasure is mine," the general replied, his eyes holding mine for a moment longer than necessary. It was a habit of powerful men, a way of taking your measure. I didn't flinch. My father let out a heavy sigh, as if the very act of introducing me was a burden. "Scarlett is our free spirit. She finds the structure of military life a bit confining." It was a masterfully passive-aggressive statement. He wasn't insulting directly, not in front of the general. He was simply framing my life as a whimsical, childish rebellion against the noble institution they all served. He was painting me as a flighty, undisciplined wanderer who couldn't handle the rigors of their world. General Hayes's expression didn't change. He simply nodded slowly. "I see." I felt a surge of cold fury, but I banked it down. My face remained a placid mask. This was the game. I knew the rules. He wanted a reaction. He wanted me to get defensive, to argue, to cause a scene. That would prove his point for him. My power, my only power in this situation, was my stillness, my silence. The aide announced that the ceremony was about to begin, and our small group broke apart. My father steered us toward our assigned table right at the front, in full view of the entire room. We were perfectly positioned, a model family on display. The perfect soldier son, the proud patriarch, and the black sheep daughter brought along for the show. The ambush was complete. I was surrounded, the trap was sprung, and all I could do was wait for the main attack. As I sat down, I smoothed the sleeves of my gray blouse, the soft fabric a thin, fragile barrier against the storm I knew was coming. Across the table, Liam caught my eye and gave me a small, apologetic smile, as if to say, "Sorry, you know how he is." I gave a slight nod in return. He didn't understand. He thought this was just dad being dad. He had no idea this was a calculated public execution, and I was the one on the chopping block. The first part of the ceremony was a blur of formal pleasantries. A chaplain gave an invocation, the national anthem was played, and General Hayes gave a welcoming speech filled with praise for the airmen of the base and their families. Throughout it all, I maintained my serene composure, a statue of polite interest. I could feel my father's eyes on me from time to time, a palpable pressure, as if he were checking to see if I was behaving. Then came the awards. One by one, servicemen and women were called to the stage to receive medals and certificates for their dedication and achievements. The applause was warm and genuine. Finally, the presenter called out, "For exceptional leadership and performance during Operation Desert Vigilance, Lieutenant Liam Vance." The room erupted in applause. My father stood up, beaming as if he himself were receiving the medal. Liam, looking both proud and humbled, walked onto the stage and shook the general's hand, accepting his commendation. As he walked back to our table, the medal gleaming on his chest, my father pulled him into a rough, one-armed hug. "This is what a Vance looks like," he whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. "Honor, duty, success." I said nothing. I simply applauded along with everyone else, my hands moving mechanically. The smile on my face felt like a plaster mask, and I could feel it cracking at the edges. After the last award was presented and the formal part of the ceremony concluded, the atmosphere relaxed. People began to move around, talking more freely. This was the moment my father had been waiting for. This was his stage. He didn't take the podium, that would have been too obvious. Instead, he did something far more insidious. He remained at our table but raised his voice just enough to draw the attention of the surrounding tables where many of his peers and their families were seated. "You know," he began, his voice resonant with false sincerity, "it brings a father such pride to see his son follow in his footsteps, to embrace the values of service and sacrifice." He gestured toward Liam, who was now surrounded by well-wishers. "That young man understands that a life without discipline is a life without purpose." He paused, letting the statement hang in the air. Then he turned his gaze slowly, deliberately toward me. The small circle of conversation around us quieted. People were sensing the shift in tone. This wasn't just a proud father rambling anymore. This was a performance. Of course, he continued, a note of practiced sadness in his voice. Not all children hear that call. Some find it difficult. They lack the fortitude, the grit. He looked directly at me, and though his voice was conversational, his eyes were as hard as steel. They choose an easier path, a life of whatever it is they do. A wave of heat washed over my face. I could feel the eyes of a dozen strangers on me, their expressions ranging from pity to curiosity. I kept my own eyes fixed on my water glass, tracing the condensation with my finger. Don't react, don't give him the satisfaction. But he was relentless. This was his grand finale. You look at my son and you see the future of the Air Force, you see strength, you see honor. He then gestured towards me with a dismissive flick of his hand as if shooing away an insect. And then you look at my daughter and you have to wonder where it all went wrong. A collective uncomfortable silence fell over our section of the room. Even Liam, who had been enjoying his moment, looked over with a deeply uneasy expression. "Dad," he said quietly, "don't." My father ignored him. He was on a roll now, fueled by years of resentment and a captive audience. He leaned forward, lowering his voice into a conspiratorial tone that carried further than any shout. "I tried, the Lord knows I tried. I gave her every opportunity. The best schools, a spot at the academy, but you can't forge steel from weak iron. Some people just aren't meant for it. They aren't built for the pressure." He shook his head, a perfect pantomime of sorrow. He was no longer speaking to me, but to the room, to his peers, to the general who was still seated at the head table, watching the entire exchange with an unnervingly blank expression. And then came the final, brutal blows. The words from the title, the ones that had been echoing in my subconscious since he'd summoned me here. "She's just a failure," he said, his voice now filled with a cold finality. He wasn't just expressing an opinion, he was passing a sentence. "Unfit for service." The words struck me with physical force: failure, unfit. He had stripped away my name, my identity, and replaced them with his labels. In this room, in his world, his word was law. He had publicly branded me. I could feel tears pricking the backs of my eyes, hot and sharp. I fought them down fiercely. Crying was weakness. Crying would be his victory. I clenched my jaw and stared into the middle distance, my entire being focused on the single task of not breaking. To make matters worse, my father orchestrated a final act of humiliation. The base had set up a small, family-friendly confidence course outside on the lawn, a low ropes course, a small climbing wall, things to entertain the children. "Look," my father said, standing up and grabbing my arm. "Let's get some fresh air. Scarlett, why don't you show us some of that civilian agility on the climbing wall? It'll be fun." It wasn't a suggestion, it was a command, a public challenge. He was trying to physically demonstrate my inadequacy. Liam looked mortified. "Dad, come on, that's enough." "Nonsense, a little family fun," he boomed, pulling me toward the doors. Trapped, I had no choice but to follow, my mind numb with shock and rage. We stood before the small climbing wall. A few children were scrambling up it with glee. My father gestured to it. "Go on, let's see what you've got." He wanted me to refuse, to look weak, or he wanted me to try and fail, to look clumsy. I glanced back at the officers' club. Several people, including General Hayes, had drifted to the large windows to watch the bizarre spectacle unfold. Fine, a part of me, the cold, analytical part, took over. The mission parameters have changed. Passive resistance has failed, time for a new approach. I took off my shoes, handed my small purse to a stunned-looking Liam, and walked to the wall. The holds were large, designed for kids. It was insultingly easy, but I wasn't thinking about the climb. I was thinking about what came next. As I reached the top and started to rappel down, I slipped. It was a controlled stumble, a maneuver I'd practiced 100 times in training scenarios. I twisted as I fell the last few feet, landing hard on the padded mats below. The impact was jarring, but I absorbed it. And in the process, I let my shoulder scrape against one of the rough textured holds. I heard the distinct sound of fabric tearing, a sharp, ripping sound that cut through the afternoon air. I lay on the mat for a second, catching my breath, the act more for show than necessity. My father strode over, a smirk on his face, ready to make a comment about my clumsiness. See, not as easy as it, he started to say, but he stopped. Liam, who had rushed over, knelt beside me. Scarlett, are you okay? His eyes widened. Your shirt, it's ripped. I pushed myself into a sitting position, my back to the crowd. I'm fine, I said, my voice tight. The tear in my gray blouse was high on my right shoulder blade, a 3-inch gash in the fabric. And through that gash, visible to anyone standing behind me, was a glimpse of black ink on my skin. It wasn't just a random piece of a tattoo. The tear had perfectly exposed the sharp, unmistakable outline of a raven's wing. For a moment, nothing happened. The world seemed to hold its breath. My father stood frozen, his smug expression slowly dissolving into confusion as he stared at the torn fabric. Liam was still kneeling beside me, his brow furrowed with concern. A few onlookers murmured, but no one understood what they were seeing. To them, it was just a tattoo, perhaps a youthful indiscretion my father could add to his list of my failings. But one person was not confused. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement at the windows of the officers' club. It was General Hayes. He had been watching the entire pathetic display. His face a mask of professional neutrality, but now the mask was gone. Even from 50 yards away, I could see the change. He went utterly still, his body rigid. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing as he focused on my back. The low chatter on the lawn began to die down as people noticed the general's strange behavior. He turned and said something sharp and low to his aide, who immediately began clearing a path. Then, with a speed and purpose that was unnerving, General Hayes strode out of the officers' club and began walking directly toward us. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke of a lifetime of command. He didn't run, but he crossed the lawn with an intensity that made everyone else seem like they were standing still. The crowd of onlookers parted for him instinctively, a sea of uniforms and civilian clothes receding before his advance. My father, finally sensing that the situation had shifted out of his control, turned to watch the general's approach. "General," he said, his voice laced with uncertainty, "is something wrong?" General Hayes did not answer him. He didn't even look at him. His pale, watchful eyes were locked on me, or more specifically, on the sliver of ink visible through my torn blouse. He came to a halt a few feet away, his gaze analytical like a munitions expert examining an unexploded bomb. The silence on the lawn was now absolute. The only sound was the distant whine of a jet engine and the frantic beating of my own heart. I remained seated on the mat, my back to him, forcing myself to breathe slowly and evenly. This was the point of no return. The world had tilted on its axis, and I had no idea which way it would settle. "Colonel Vance," General Hayes said, his voice quiet but carrying with absolute authority. He still hadn't looked at my father. "What is the meaning of this spectacle?" My father, flustered, gestured helplessly. "Sir, it was just a bit of family fun. My daughter took a little tumble, that's all. She's clumsy." General Hayes ignored the explanation completely. His eyes were still fixed on my back. He took one more step forward, his shadow falling over me. I could feel the intensity of his gaze like a physical weight. He knew. In the highest echelons of the military and intelligence communities, there were symbols that carried more weight than any medal or rank insignia. They were sigils of clandestine units, markers of operations that existed in the deepest shadows of national security. To see one in the wild, on a civilian on a domestic Air Force base, was not just unusual, it was impossible. He finally tore his gaze from the tattoo and looked at my face. He saw the cold, controlled calm I had fought so hard to maintain. He saw the defiance in my eyes, and in that moment he understood. This wasn't an accident, this wasn't clumsiness, this was a message. His own face, which had been a storm of shock and disbelief, settled into a look of profound, almost grim respect. He straightened to his full height, his posture snapping into a rigid parade rest, a sign of deference that was so out of place it was jarring. He turned his head slowly and looked for the first time at my father. He looked at Colonel Marcus Vance, a man who a moment ago had been the proud patriarch, the king of his castle, and he saw something else entirely. He saw a fool. A man who had been publicly, spectacularly, and dangerously wrong. The general's voice, when he spoke, was low and strained, cracked with a tension that sent a shiver down my spine. It was a voice that understood the catastrophic breach of protocol that had just occurred and the immense hidden power that had just been revealed. He looked at my father, then his eyes flicked down to me, sitting on the ground in my torn blouse. Then he looked back at the colonel. And he said the only three words that mattered. She outranks you. Chapter 6, The Reversal. The three words hung in the stunned silence of the desert air. They did not compute. The sentence was grammatically correct, but the meaning was so alien, so fundamentally opposed to the reality everyone on that lawn understood, that it created a momentary paralysis. She outranks you. My father stared at General Hayes, his face a mask of utter bewilderment. He gave a short, nervous laugh. Sir, I don't understand. That's my daughter, Scarlett. She's a civilian. Step back, Colonel, General Hayes said, and this time his voice was not cracked. It was pure ice. It was an order, sharp and absolute, the kind of command that bypasses conscious thought and elicits pure reflex. My father, a man who had not been spoken to in that tone by anyone but a four-star general in 20 years, flinched as if struck. He took an involuntary step backward, his face paling. The general then did something that shattered the last remnants of my father's world. He crouched down, not with the awkwardness of an older man, but with the fluid grace of a S. Older, he lowered himself to my level, his eyes meeting mine. His expression was a complex mixture of apology, awe, and severe gravity. Ma'am, he said, his voice low and for my ears only. My apologies for the environment. I was not aware your security has been compromised. The use of the word ma'am was a thunderclap. It wasn't the polite ma'am one uses for any woman. It was the ma'am of the United States military, a term of address for a superior officer or a high-ranking official. From a brigadier general, it was a gesture of deference so profound it was almost surreal. I simply nodded, my throat too tight to speak. The walls of my compartmentalization were crumbling, and the raw, wounded part of me was threatening to flood the calm, professional operator. General Hayes seemed to understand. He offered me his hand. "Let's get you out of here," he murmured. I took his hand and he helped me to my feet with a steady strength. As I stood, my torn shirt shifted, and for a brief moment the entire sigil was visible to those standing behind me. The stylized raven, its wings spread wide, its talons clutching a key. The mark of the Defense Clandestine Service's most elite Special Operations Branch, Unit 734, the Ravens. The people who were sent in when all other options had failed, the ghosts. A sharp, collective gasp went through the small crowd of onlookers who were close enough to see it clearly. They still didn't understand what it meant, but they understood from their general's reaction that it was something of immense significance. I turned and faced my father. The transformation in him was horrifying. The confident, booming colonel was gone. In his place was a shrunken, gray-faced man. His eyes, which had always held either fiery pride or cold contempt, were now just blank with shock. He looked from the general's grim face to my calm one to the torn shirt and back again. The pieces were clicking into place in his mind, but they were forming a picture his brain refused to accept. Scarlett, he whispered, his voice weak and reedy. What is this? What is going on? Before I could answer, General Hayes stepped between us, partially shielding me from my father's view. That information is above your clearance level, Colonel, he said coldly. He turned to his aide, who had been hovering nearby, looking terrified. Captain, escort Specialist Vance to my office. Now, no one speaks to her, no one approaches her. Is that clear? Yes, General, the captain snapped, his eyes wide. Specialist, the general had used my actual, unclassified title. It was another signal, another piece of the puzzle he was laying out for those with the clearance to understand it. The captain, a young woman who looked barely older than Liam, approached me cautiously. Ma'am, this way, please. I looked at my brother Liam. He was standing beside my father, his face utterly ashen. The commendation medal on his chest seemed garish and meaningless now. His entire life had been built on a simple premise: his father's way was the right way, the only way. He was looking at me as if for the first time not as his failed older sister, but as a complete and terrifying stranger. Our eyes met, and in his, I saw the shattering of a lifetime of certainties. I gave him a single, small nod, an acknowledgement of the chasm that had just opened between us. Then I turned and followed the captain, leaving my father and brother standing on the lawn like statues in the wreckage of their own making. The walk back to the officers' club was the strangest journey of my life. The crowd parted for me and my escort as if I were a leper or a queen. They stared, they whispered, but no one dared meet my eye. I was no longer Scarlett Vance, the disappointing daughter. I was an anomaly, a terrifying question mark that had just exploded in the middle of their orderly world. As we entered the building, General Hayes's voice boomed from behind us, addressed to the assembled crowd. This incident is now a matter of national security. You will not speak of what you saw, you will not speculate, you will return to your duties, dismissed. The finality in his tone was absolute. I didn't look back. I just kept walking, my head held high, the torn fabric on my back feeling less like a mark of shame and more like a battle standard. The ambush had failed, the execution had been stayed, the balance of power had not just shifted, it had been completely and irrevocably reversed. General Hayes's office was a stark contrast to the rest of the club. It was a functional, unadorned space, dominated by a large desk and several secure communication consoles. The only decorations were a folded American flag in a triangular case and a single photo of a woman and two children. The captain led me in and offered me a seat before retreating to stand guard outside the door. A moment later, the general entered, closing the door firmly behind him. He walked to a Mall sideboard, poured 2 glasses of water, and handed one to me. His movements were calm and deliberate, designed to de-escalate the situation. First, he began, his voice now devoid of the previous tension, replaced by a weary professionalism. On behalf of the United States Air Force, I want to offer you my deepest and most sincere apology for the conduct of Colonel Vance. What happened out there was an inexcusable breach of professional and personal ethics. It will be dealt with. I took a sip of water, my hand steady. That won't be necessary, General. It was a family matter. He gave me a long, searching look. Specialist Vance, Scarlett. With all due respect, the moment your unit's sigil was exposed on my base, it ceased to be a simple family matter. Your father's ignorance of your status is one thing, his public behavior toward a serving member of a Special Operations Command is another entirely. He put you, and by extension your entire operational security, at risk. I knew he was right. My father's tirade wasn't just a personal insult, it was a potential security catastrophe. My cover is non-official legend. It's designed to be pliable, no harm was done. No harm, he countered, a flash of disbelief in his eyes. The man publicly called a Raven operative a failure. He created a spectacle that drew the attention of half the command staff on this base. We'll be logging this as a high-level security incident. Your commanding officer will be notified. My heart sank. The last thing I wanted was for this domestic disaster to become a black mark on my professional record. General, I respectfully request that you log this as a personal conflict, resolved on site. My co doesn't need to know my father is an idiot. A faint smile touched General Hayes's lips for the first time. He's more than an idiot, he's a liability, but I understand your position. He sighed, running a hand over his face. The sigil, the Raven and key, I haven't seen one of those since my time at CENTCOM. I knew your unit existed only as a whisper. To see the proof on the daughter of one of my own colonels, he shook his head. The world is a strange place. We sat in silence for a moment. He was giving me space, allowing me to regain my equilibrium. What now? I finally asked. Now I provide you with secure quarters for as long as you need. I will personally see to it that no one bothers you. As for your father and brother, he trailed off, his expression hardening again. Colonel Vance has been relieved of his public duties for the remainder of the day. He and your brother are waiting in the visitors' lounge. They have been instructed not to leave. They wish to speak with you. The choice is entirely yours. For a moment, I considered refusing. I could walk out of here, get in my car, and never speak to either of them again. It would be easy, cleaner, but that would be running and I was done running. I'll speak to them, I said. He nodded as if he expected it. Very well, I'll have them brought to a private conference room. Take all the time you need. The conference room was small and sterile. My father and Liam were already there, sitting at a long table. They both stood when I entered. The change in my father was absolute. He looked 10 years older. The arrogant, powerful colonel was gone, replaced by a confused, broken man. Liam just looked lost, his eyes darting between me and our father. I closed the door and stood before them, my arms crossed. I was still wearing the torn blouse. I wanted them to see it. Scarlett, my father began, his voice hoarse. General Hayes said, he said you outrank me. I don't understand. What is that tattoo? What are you? I looked at him, and for the first time I felt not anger, not hurt, but a profound and weary pity. He was a man who only understood the world through a single, rigid lens of rank and honor, and that lens had just been shattered. It's not about rank, Dad, I said, my voice quiet but clear. Not in the way you think. It's not about being a major or a colonel. My world, the one you always dismissed, it has a different kind of structure, a different kind of service. I paused, choosing my words carefully. I couldn't tell him the truth, not really, but I could give him a version of it he might understand. You think I failed because I left the academy? You think I'm a quitter because I didn't want your life? The truth is I was recruited out of the academy for a different program, one that required me to be invisible. It required me to seem like I was drifting, like I had no purpose. That was my cover. My service required me to be a disappointment to you. The words hit him like a physical blow. He stumbled back into his chair, his face ashen. Recruited? No, they would have told me, a man of my rank. No, they wouldn't have, I said flatly. That was the entire point. My work is sensitive. The less people know, the safer my team is, the safer. I am. Liam finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. All this time we thought Dad thought he was so hard on you. Yes, he was, I said, turning my gaze to my brother. And you stood by and let him because it was easier for you. Liam flinched but nodded, accepting the truth of it. I'm sorry, Scarlett, I had no idea. I looked back at my father. He was staring at the table at his own hands as if he'd never seen them before. The entire foundation of his pride, his unwavering belief in his own judgment, had been a lie. His golden child was a fine officer, yes. But his failure of a daughter, the one he had mocked and shamed, had been serving her country in ways he couldn't even imagine, in a silence and solitude he would never have been able to endure. Her rank wasn't just about authority, it was about sacrifice. I didn't do it to spite you, Dad, I said softly. I did it because it was my calling. It was my way to serve, and I am good at it. I have brought more honor to this family in the shadows than you can ever display on your uniform. I didn't need to shout. The quiet truth was more devastating than any angry tirade. I had spent my entire life craving his approval, a single word of praise, and now, seeing him so utterly defeated, I realized I didn't need it anymore. My worth wasn't something he could bestow or withhold. I had earned it myself in silence and in secret. I turned to leave. I'm going now. Scarlett, wait, my father croaked, looking up at me, his eyes filled with a desperate, pleading confusion. What do we do now? I stopped at the door and looked back at the two men who had defined my life for so long. That's up to you, I said. You can choose to learn from this, or you can continue to live in the world you've built, but my life is no longer subject to your approval. My service is my own, my honor is my own. And with that, I walked out of the room, leaving the silence and the wreckage behind me. I walked past the captain at the door, nodded to General Hayes, who was waiting down the hall, and didn't stop until I was outside in the clean, sharp air of the desert. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. I was no longer a failure. I was no longer unfit. I was Specialist Scarlett Vance of the Defense Clandestine Service, and for the first time in my life, I was truly, completely free. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have forgiven your father, or would you have walked away for good? It's easy to judge from the outside, but family dynamics are the most complex battlefields of all. Sometimes the deepest wounds are inflicted not by our enemies, but by those who are supposed to love us the most. And sometimes finding your own strength means shattering the world you came from.